Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would give my little fight review and my little opinion on the championship fight that ended up happening, of course, between that of Keyshawn Davis versus that of Denys Berinchyk. And of course, for those of you that did not end up hearing about the results, Keyshawn Davis, pretty much predictably, just as I had predicted, unfortunately, I could not put out a fight prediction video, but that's why I put out a post so certain people would know my fight prediction. I had Keyshawn Davis more than likely winning by that of a latter round stoppage. Now, of course, he ended up surpassing expectations because, of course, he ended up getting a knockout within the fourth round. He hit Denys Berinchyk, I believe, with a good 1-2, but especially a good liver shot with the left hook to the body and it knocked Denys Berinchyk down to the point of where Denys Berinchyk, of course, he cannot get back up. I mean, well, let me not state that. Because in my view, actually, he could get back up. It's just that he quit because he realized that Keyshawn Davis, that he was going to be the better fighter. It just is what it is. And you just see that in boxing. And, certain people, of course, may criticize Denys Berinchyk, but, to me, it's not really that big of a deal because Denys Berinchyk, it is what it is. He's not really that talented of a fighter. And I know that certain people may look at this fight and say, oh, well, Denys Berinchyk, he beat Emmanuel Navarrete and he was an Olympic medalist and all sort of stuff. Well, just because you're an Olympic medalist or very good in the amateurs, it doesn't always mean that it's going to translate very well to the pros. For those of you that remember Luke Campbell, who was a former undefeated British contender at the 135-pound weight class, a guy that pretty much is known for losing every big fight in his career, whether it be against Jorge Linares, Lomachenko, or Ryan Garcia. Luke Campbell, I believe, was a gold medalist, but then he goes to the pros and he pretty much never accomplishes shit within his whole entire career. So, I mean, it is what it is. But Denys Berinchyk is one of those fighters. He's a guy that is relatively tough. He's a guy that's a bit awkward because of the angles and the way that he moves, but he also has a lot of faults. He shuffles his feet, he pretty much lunges forward. He's a guy that is not particularly fast nor particularly strong. He's never going to be a guy that is going to be a top 10 level pound for pound fighter, really even the top 30. It just is what it is. But Keyshawn Davis, of course, he was able to pretty much, pass this test with flying colors, which is pretty much what I thought he was going to do. I do think that he was a bit bigger than Denys Berinchyk, so I think eventually he's going to have to move to 140, but he is an exceptional level talent. Keyshawn Davis, of course, for those of you that do not know, of course, he has been trained by that at Bomac, who, of course, is Terrence Bud Crawford's trainer. And, of course, predictably, Terrence Bud Crawford has been working with him a little bit as well. And you can tell. You can tell that both Terrence Crawford has worked with both Keyshawn Davis and that is Shakur Stevenson with the way that they move and certain counters that they throw and the way of their positioning and the way that they fight. And both of those guys are exceptional level fighters. And Terrence Bud Crawford, of course, is an exceptional level fighter. He's one of the greatest fighters ever, at least in my personal view. But one thing I will state is this, and I didn't see it quite as much within this fight, but I have seen it in the past with Keyshawn Davis. Sometimes he does not move his head off the center line quite as well. And that's one thing about Terrence Bud Crawford. He moves his head off the center line pretty well. But sometimes there will also be times where you take a look at Crawford because he has such a long reach, usually compared to a lot of his opponents. He can get away with sometimes having his chin a little bit more higher up in the air or fighting a little bit more tall. Or when fighters are within the range, they're able to land a good overhand on Crawford because he doesn't defend as well on the inside as what you may personally think. And we've seen that with Sean Porter, Aegis Kavalauskas, and also a little bit against Israel Madrimov, but it is what it is. But that being stated, Keyshawn Davis's defense looked pretty exceptional tonight. Of course, we're going to see how good it actually is once he steps up in class and, of course, goes up the weight classes. But I was very thoroughly impressed with Keyshawn Davis, other than maybe, the slight nitpick of I would have liked to seen more of a setup with the lead hand. I thought that maybe he was doing a little bit too much and trying to go for the knockout, or at least, in terms of going for big shots. But I mean, it really didn't matter because Denys Berinchyk really didn't have anything to threaten Keyshawn Davis with. And, this also lets me go into my next point, because also when we talk about Shakur Stevenson, who is another exceptional level fighter and someone that has the skills to pay the bills, but Keyshawn Davis may even have more potential than that of a Shakur Stevenson. And the reason why I state that, not necessarily because I think Keyshawn Davis is way more talented than Shakur Stevenson or anything like that. In terms of skills, I would even have to give that to Shakur. But whenever you talk about someone that has been potentially a future number one pound for pound candidate, whether you think that they were there or not, certain guys that were debated there, they pretty much have to have the full all-around package. They pretty much not only have to have the boxing IQ and the boxing ability, but they also have to be a relatively great athlete. Even when you go all the way back to Sugar Ray Robinson, Joe Louis, Rocky Marciano, Sugar Ray Leonard, Marvin Hagler, Roberto Duran, later on, of course, maybe guys like Evander Holyfield or, Lennox Lewis or, Roy Jones Jr., Oscar De La Hoya, Felix Tito Trinidad. Of course, there's also in the 2000s Floyd Mayweather, Manny Pacquiao, certain guys like that. Then later on, of course, Crawford, Canelo, Lomachenko, and Usyk. The thing that all those guys have in common, and I'm not stating that all those fighters are necessarily on the same level as the other, but even to be debated as the number one pound for pound fighter at one point in time, you pretty much have to be the full on package. You pretty much have to be a great athlete, also as well as someone that has an exceptional level of technical ability and someone that has an exceptional level of boxing intellect. And Keyshawn Davis appears to have that. Now, once again, I don't know how great he actually is because I don't think Denys Berinchyk is an elite level champion. I think he's one of these guys that's got a belt, and of course, he beat Navarrete, but Navarrete, first of all, you can tell didn't belong at that weight class. He clearly had a little bit more fat on him in that weight, and he really was not prepared for that. And then on top of that, Emmanuel Navarrete, he's a guy that's debatably not even an A-grade level fighter in the first place. He's a guy that, of course, beat Oscar Valdez on two separate occasions. But Emmanuel Navarrete, if you really look at his boxing ability, he's a guy that is very flawed. He's a guy that has very little defensive ability. He's a guy that really winds up and advertises a certain amount of his punches. And a big part of the reason why he also was so successful against Oscar Valdez is because Oscar Valdez can be a relatively one-dimensional fighter at times. And on top of that, Navarrete had the height and the reach over him. Now, certain people, of course, they say that, well, it's more about the weight than the height and the reach. No, height and reach overall is a very big factor as well. But we'll see what ends up happening later on with that. So the Emmanuel Navarrete win really didn't impress me all that much because, first of all, it was a very close fight for Emmanuel Navarrete, first moving up in weight, and Denys Berinchyk is just a very awkward and, to be honest with you, not the prettiest fighter that I've ever seen. But it just is what it is. And of course, when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about his ability. He just doesn't have anything that is exceptional, and he also makes a lot of mistakes. It just is what it is. And on top of that, he is not someone that is particularly fast nor particularly strong. So he pretty much really did not have a viable chance in this fight. And he wouldn't have really had a viable chance against any of the other elite level champions in the 135-pound weight class either. But it is what it is. But once again, that's not to discredit Keyshawn Davis. I think that he has a great chance in order to defeat some of the best at 135 and also at 140 pounds. Now the question is who potentially is going to be willing to face him next, or who is he going to fight next? Of course, there's Lomachenko, but I'm not really quite sure how much longer Lomachenko plans on fighting. He seems to be on the fence about if he should still fight or if he's going to retire. You have Gervonta Tank Davis, but Gervonta has not really seemed very interested in getting in the ring with a lot of the bigger names, at least from what I've seen. Of course, you have Shakur Stevenson, but, I'm not sure if they're going to fight because both of those guys are boys of Terrence Bud Crawford. But, I mean, they might fight because I don't think Bomac trained Shakur Stevenson, so we'll see what ends up happening there. That'd be very particularly interesting. And then, of course, you have fights at 140 with Teofimo Lopez and maybe a Devin Haney or Ryan Garcia, certain guys like that. But I don't see those fights happening yet. Maybe the Teofimo Lopez fight, just because they've talked about that fight for a while. But first of all, that's if Teofimo Lopez even wants to fight him. And secondly, overall, if Keyshawn Davis really wants to move up to 140. Because Keyshawn Davis in this fight, he looks at least like a 140-pounder. He's a guy that's the exact same size and girth, pretty much as a Teofimo Lopez and a Devin Haney. He really belongs more at the 140-pound weight class, where when you take a look at Gervonta or Shakur, they're a little bit more 135-pounders. So, I mean, we'll see what ends up happening. But it's going to be very particularly interesting to see where this goes. But I was very impressed with Keyshawn Davis. He's an excellent athlete. He's also an excellent boxer. I would like to see a little bit more jab work from him, but it's not like I've never seen him use an elite level jab before. So it's going to be interesting. Hopefully he can develop somewhat of the same variance and the same discipline and technical ability within that lead hand as what a Crawford did, which is why Crawford is so successful. But it's going to be very interesting. He's a great level talent. I can't necessarily call him a super great fighter as of yet because, of course, he's only won one belt. But, he pretty much passes the eye test in every single category to me. He has very great feet. He was very responsible defensively within this fight. Once again, other than the slight nitpick of I wish that there was a little bit more of a technical jab. Other than that, I can't really state anything negative about Keyshawn Davis, but we'll see, what ends up happening. And of course, that lack of jab at times was a little bit because Denys Berinchyk, which is pretty much what a lot of these Ukrainian fighters do, especially ever since the Lomachenko and Usyk generation. They love to feint a lot and pretty much fake to the body and go up and down. So to be fair, you don't always want to overextend with the jab or overthrow your jab with these guys because, they're going to really rely on you, kind of throwing that lead hand so they can slip under or counter over the top. So I kind of get it. I'm not going to go too far on that. But great job by Mr. Keyshawn Davis, one of the greater champions. We'll see where he goes. Of course, I can't really put a super big pound-for-pound ranking on him yet, but do I think it's possible that later on he could be a top 10 pound-for-pound fighter? Absolutely. We'll see where he goes. But I would love to see him in a fight with either Lomachenko or Shakur Stevenson next. I would love to see him fight Shakur Stevenson next. I doubt that fight would happen, but we'll see what ends up happening there. NT Fima Lopez, that'd be an interesting fight as well. Maybe someone at the 140-pound weight class. Maybe if he moves up there, the first fight, maybe against a winner of Jack Catterall versus, what's his name, Arnold Barboza. That'd be interesting. Although that guy's supposed to be in a title fight next, I believe, against Lopez or something like that. And by the way, I predict Jack Catterall to win that fight against Arnold Barboza, but it's a very close fight. I'll do a fight prediction on that tomorrow. And then, of course, there are a couple of other fights out there as well. But that pretty much is what I have to say about Keyshawn Davis. Now, about Mr. Xander Zayas, or Zayas, I believe, the Puerto Rican fighter, the 154-pound contender, who, of course, got the stoppage over the undefeated German fighter. I mean, certain people may say that both Keyshawn Davis and Xander Zayas, that they were in there with relatively good boxers. And I mean, relatively good boxers, but guys that are never, ever, ever going to make it big. It just is what it is. There are fights like this all the time where, the promoters try to sell it as, oh, they were in there with an elite level boxer, but neither Xander Zayas nor Keyshawn Davis, neither of them were really in there against a guy that was ever going to be an A-grade level fighter. But at least with Keyshawn Davis, he ended up doing what he needed to do. Xander Zayas, of course, put on an excellent performance, but the thing is about Xander Zayas, first of all, he needs to keep his left hand up a little bit more because he gets caught with the right hand a little bit too often. But that being stated, he is an exceptional level talent in terms of skills and what he can do in the boxing ring. He has very good feats and coordination to my recollection. He has a relatively good defense. He has excellent movement. And he's a guy that can fight relatively well within all ranges. But the thing is about Xander Zayas, and just like I said at the beginning of the video, in order to be potentially, the number one pound for pound guy or even top 10 pound for pound, you have to be a guy that more than likely has pretty much the whole entire package. And Xander Zayas, I mean, his level of power, of course, he ended up getting a stoppage, but I mean, one could argue that it should have been way earlier, especially with the amount of punches that he was landing on him. And his opponent, I forget the opponent's name, but some German fighter. And, these German fighters, they always come in, and they always try to, put them as these dangerous fighters, but they're pretty much a straight up and down regular fighter. He's a guy that really did not change head levels a whole lot. He really pretty much had no special effects whatsoever. He's a guy that's, a good test if you're on your way up within your first 20-some fights. But he's not a guy that's ever going to make it big. It just is what it is. But that being said about Xander Zayas, it's going to be interesting to see what happens if he faces guys like a Jesus Ramos or someone like a Virgil Ortiz or an Israel Madrimov or someone like that. It's going to be very interesting because Xander Zayas, in my view, has all the talent in the world, but he doesn't really have the punching power, in my view, to sustain, possible attacks from those fighters. So we'll see. We'll see what ends up happening there. It's going to be interesting, but I'm not quite sure if I would favor him 100% to win against, say, like that of a Virgil Ortiz or some of those other fighters. But we'll see what ends up happening. I'm rooting for the kid because, of course, I always like the certain amount of the Puerto Rican fighters. But that being stated, I need to see him in bigger tests. And I also need to see, if his level of power can maybe carry over. But so far within his past several fights, I've not seen it. So we'll see what ends up happening. But that pretty much is about it for today. I just thought that I would talk about that. Of course, tomorrow we have Jack Catterall versus Arnold Barboza. I predict Jack Catterall to win that more than likely by decision, but we'll see what ends up happening there. But anyways, that pretty much is about it. Congratulations to both Mr. Xander Zayas and Keyshawn Davis. Xander Zayas, I thought that it was a good performance, pretty much regular for him, someone that is very technically sound, but not really super powerful. And when you talk about Keyshawn Davis, I thought that it was an excellent performance, pretty good performance. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. We'll see what ends up happening here. I can't wait to see his next fight. It's going to be very particularly interesting. But that pretty much is about it for today. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.